Hello friends, in today's topic of discussion is visual expressions, folk art, calendar art and photography, and it is part of the series of lecture which we are doing on understanding popular culture. In the earlier lecture on this particular theme, we talked about the importance of the folk art and how folk art has been closely associated not only in terms of the concerns of the artists where these kinds of folk art has developed over a period of time, but we also talked about that how it has been closely associated with the issue of social conditions and social reform, and the education and awareness of the masses in their own kinds of mediums plays an important role. And we also talked about some of the important concerns of the people or the artists, those who are associated with these kinds of art forms. We talked about Fulkari, we also talked about kolam and other kinds of floor arts. We not only talked about various kinds of paintings like Madhubani, which have been popular, or the Fad art on Rajasthan, or the Worli art which was associated with Maharashtra. We also in a way talked about the Kalamkari art in Andhra Pradesh, which has been popular, and how all these kinds of art forms, they have been not only regional in nature, but over a period of time they were able to gain some kind of currency in different parts of India as well. And we talked about the Kalighat paintings of West Bengal and how over a period of time these kinds of cultural preservation has been very, very important in that context. And we were also in a way trying to communicate these kinds of ideas where the folk art forms, they are concerned with the important topics of their times, and environment was one which we were talking in the earlier lecture, and how environmental concerns, they are not only concerned with art, but at the same time environment has been a concern across the world with the issues of climate change, global warming and the various kinds of changes which have been happening across the world in the environment, and how this kind of a balance between the man and the environment is an important concern in today's times. So this kind of a concern was already being communicated in the various kinds of folk arts, because people, those who were concerned with these kinds of arts, they were very well aware about this kind of a delicate balance which has to be there with regard to the man and environment. Then they also try to communicate the kind of changes which are happening in the society, and they are not only trying to show the changes which are happening, but at the same time they are also trying that more changes they should come in the society in the different spheres. Then the concerns of the health and human rights, they have also been very important in these kinds of folk arts, because the health is one important parameter which has to be taken into account. And we see that when these kinds of folk arts, they are trying to communicate these kinds of messages which are there in the society, then the indigenous people or the local people, they are able to understand them in a much better way, because they are rooted in their own particular culture. We also see that in the framework of the folk art, that how it has been maneuvered to stimulate the vested messages and movements in the framework of the kind of political protest which happen. And we also see that how the community building earlier, when there were challenges of distance and communication, folk art was a strong medium to bring people together and create a shared family identity and purpose. So in that sense, folk art definitely played an important role in the community building, and it was also concerned with the political protests as well. And we find that by creating the art together, people would build connections and work towards common goals as well, because many of them, they were in a way connected with each other, and when they were working in a collaborative manner, then they were able to contribute in a far greater manner. Then we also see that different kinds of art forms, they have played an important role. For example, Kathputli Khel would engage children in a participatory format, where face-to-face interaction was happening and the engagement with the puppets was there, and a story that would also spur the excitement, and it was a great source of entertainment as well. So we find that when the Kathputli Khel, it was being exhibited to children, and then as you can see on the screen as well, the various dimensions of the Kathputli Khel and the artists, those who have been associated with the Katputli Khel, and how children, they were able to associate, or they were being able to participate in that particular format, because they were in a way interacting face to face with the Katputlis. And the people, those who were controlling these puppets, how they were also involved in that sense. And when they were trying to narrate any kind of a story, it would bring a lot of excitement among the people, those who were witness to these stories. And we also find that how they were also able to bring a lot of entertainment to the people, those who were watching them. And how such kind of use of the art forms has always been very important, in that sense that they are very effective and beneficial. And we also find that the educational messages could always be imparted through a platform that is culturally responsive and appeals to the sentiments of the audience. And it also acts a way to preserve, revive in some cases, for example, and sustain these art forms as well as the artists. And how they also cultivate the children's interest in the art form and allows creation of educational content as well. So we find that how, when we are trying to use the different kinds of art form or music for that matter for the education, then they have been very, very important. And how the interest of the children in the various kinds of art forms, and when we find that such kind of interest is being cultivated among children and a lot of educational content is being created, then it is also beneficial for the succeeding generations as well. And as I told you in the lecture, that how the various kinds of themes like the environment, history, literature, they have also been closely associated with the folk art. And when the folk artists, they are trying to communicate these kinds of aspects, then definitely people, they get engaged. And we find that it in a way also enhances another dimension of learning, which is the language skills as well, as it enriches the vocabulary and helps form a stronger connect with the native language, people and culture. When people they are concerned with their own language skills, when they are learning a particular kind of a language, then and if especially it is their native language, then they are able to connect it in a far better manner. Apart from the folk art, we also see that calendar art, it dates back to the colonial era, and many studies which have been conducted on the calendar art, they highlight the history and information which is related to it. And when Raja Ravi Verma created his oleographs and colored prints to be distributed among the general public, the development of printing press also played a significant role at that point of time. And one of the scholars, Inglis, has argued that the calendar art is a general phrase for popular print art. So how we see the calendar art, how calendar art over a period of time has played an important role during the times of the national movement and hereafter as well. And we also have seen that some of the scholars, they have tried to see the calendar art in the context of their own ideas, and and it has also been talked about in the framework of the ideas of unity in diversity and the context of nationhood as well. And we have seen that how many of the posters of the earlier times, they were concerned with religion, because the religious themes, they were being communicated on the posters. And many times such kind of presentations, how they were seen by the people, those who kept these posters in their own homes. So the reception of the posters was another important concern which was there in the calendar art. And we find that as opportunity development picked up speed, and the moral stories and the symbolism connected with the opportunity images and the possibility of a free Indian country were universalized all around the nation through the calendars, and how they affected bringing some kind of a feeling of patriotism and social trustworthiness, and how the calendars likewise turned into a social image and marker of an individual, family, strict connection or confidence and conviction framework as well. Then we also see that in the late 19th and the mid 20th century, they saw an unexpected flood in the way of life of famous pictures like those of Hindu gods and goddesses, fanciful stories, representation of patriot pioneers, and scenes being made by specialists. So we find that in the 19th and the 20th century, some kind of changes they were also brought about in the calendar art, and the other kinds of themes, as I told you, they became important in the portrayal of the calendar art, as we talked about the patriotic pioneers, those who were there, those who were concerned with ideas of patriotism. And we also see that the various Hindu gods and goddesses, they were also being represented on these calendars as well. And we see that how these calendars, especially in the earlier times as late as 1960s, 70s, 80s, we find that before the arrival of the technology, calendars were the source of information, where you will get all sorts of information about the days and the months and the years with regard to that particular year, and not only religious calendars but calendars which were published by various companies, banks and other public sector undertakings. They were being given as gifts by them to the people, and how these calendars they were adorning the walls of various households. But especially 90s and thereafter, things changed a lot when we find that this kind of an art, calendar art, it became comparatively much more restricted. And we find that how A. Mukherjee has talked about the aristocratic Indian household, how they hired artists like Ravi Verma to depict the deities and gods during the colonial era, and following the discovery of lithography and oleograph, there were mass manufacture of these kinds of pictures. And we find that when you talk about the calendar workmanship which was acquired ubiquity with the drive of Raja Ravi Verma, the father of the current craftsmanship in India. And he spearheaded the setting up of quite possibly of earliest lithographic press in India. And Verma culminated in Western models of portrayal and advocated pictures of gods and goddesses which he delivered so genuine. So we find that Raja Ravi Verma played an important role in that sense, that how he was instrumental in portraying those kinds of images which are Indian in nature. And we also find that the visual form of the religious story, common myths, mythical situations and folk sagas, they have been combined to make art more engaging. And at the same time we find that apart from the art, the technology also played an important role, because the printing is the work of technology, and the invention of lithography and its widespread use in the consumerist society, it greatly altered the types of correspondence that might take place in both private and the public settings with the individuals, groups of people and heavenly beings as well. So in that sense we find that how technology part was also very important, and how it brought about changes in the society, and how society over a period of time also got changed in that sense, and how it became more and more consumerist over a period of time. And we find that how the lithographs, they were quickly changed into the tools of advertising by glorifying the images of rulers like Shivaji and Maharana Pratap, who fought to overthrow the foreign monarchs. And this was made possible by the efficiency and the simplicity of fabrication, as well as adaptable philosophy behind them. So in that way we find that how technology definitely played an important role, and how the kind of various kinds of changes which were happening over a period of time, where we find that a calendar, they became a huge medium of promotion, where the sudden change in the portrayal of women can be seen. And the traditional stereotypical imagery of women shown in the artworks of Raja Ravi Verma has been transformed by new age vision. So we find that how this kind of a change in the calendar art also took place within the framework of the representation of women as well. And we find that the role of women, they changed with the modern perception of beauty. We can see a majority of supermodels, actresses, sports icons, motivational speakers, etc. with new age advancement as well. And Tapti Guha Thakurta has emphasized that how the criteria for classifying art as high or low are continually evolving, and how caliber and nature of feminine images depicted in the calendars, they define such kind of gradations as well. So how calendar art was also associated with the portrayal of women, and how women's portrayal, they were being in a way received by the audience in the calendar art. Then we find that how Thakurta has also talked about the transformation of the calendar art throughout its history, from monolithic representation of Kali Ghat to portrayal of gods and goddesses at Calcutta Art Studio, depiction of their animated gestures, and intricate representation of mythological scenes against the backdrop of ornate palaces and lush surroundings. So in that sense, when we tend to understand the calendar art, we find that it was intended for the color prints. And Patricia Oberoi has talked about the images that come to mind are the colors and the color prints which are produced for framing to serve as wall decorations, the two artistically rendered illustrations which are used to grace the hanging calendars, almost typically to polychrome lithographs that depict gods and goddesses and enigmatic and charismatic talks from their lives and times. So we find the scholars like Patricia Oberoi, they've tried to communicate the kinds of ideas which were concerned with the calendar art, and how it was in a way connected with the gods and goddesses, and how some kind of tales from the earlier times which were charismatic in nature, they were also being shown in them. And when you talk about these kinds of aspects, we have also seen that Patricia Oberoi has also talked from the framework of the unity, the concept of the unity in diversity through calendar art, and how the idea of nationhood was also being depicted in the calendar art. And we find that in various kinds of calendars, the idea of patriotism and was shown, and these kinds of symbols which were being shown in the calendar art, they were trying to communicate some kind of a meaning. And when these kinds of calendars, they were being distributed, they were also trying to propagate those kinds of ideas as we talked about. Another important concern, apart from the folk art which we have talked about, or the calendar art which we have talked about, was the concern of the photography, and how photography is also a means of visual communication and expression, and photography has distinct aesthetic capabilities as well. And the important characteristic of photography is immediacy. And when upon the exposure to light forming the image, the sensitive material undergoes changes in its structure. A latent but reversed image, usually called a negative, is formed, and image becomes visible by development with chemicals. So we are talking about the photographs of the earlier times, where we find that the developments in photography in the context of the digital photography of the today's times had not taken place. So initially we find that the way photographs, they were being made through the film, and a negative was to be cleaned through a chemical, and a positive was to be developed after that. So such kind of developments, they were there in the 19th century, when we find that the art of photography emerges. But we also see that one of the important characteristics of photography was immediacy, that how when an event was happening, at that point of time, the photograph was being clicked. So from that point of view, it also was some kind of a document as well. But we find that in photography as well, a number of developments over a period of time took place, where we find that even the processing was being done immediately. Digital photography, when it came, then it reduced that kind of a volume, because nowadays we find that many of the photographs, they are not even printed. They are stored in the mobiles, they are stored in the digital cameras. So many a times photography, it has also been belittled as some kind of a mechanical art because of its dependence on technology. But we also see that how a lot of creativity is also involved in the clicking of the photographs as well. So it is not only a mechanical art because of the kind of creativity which is attached to this particular art, because it is not an automatic process in that sense, although the camera usually limits the photographer to depicting the existing objects rather than the imaginary or interpretive views. Skilled photographers, they can introduce creativity into mechanical reproduction process. So we find that there are wide-ranging changes in the perception brought about by the technology since its invention in 1839, and how the photography shaped the aesthetic sensibilities and ethical sensitivities of the modern world, and how the camera has informed our understanding of art, politics, nature and self, because many times we say that how images they speak, but at the same time images they do not speak for themselves, but the way the images they are being captured, they speak. So in that sense we find that the people, those who are involved in photography, how they have their own inclinations in the political sphere, what is their concern about nature, what is their thinking about their own self, all of them is getting reflected in the clicking of the photographs as well. And when you talk about that how self-portraits they are being shown on the social media nowadays, which many times they cause body dysmorphia and bad mental health among the children. But this kind of obsessive sharing of photographs of oneself, it has a long history going back to the first photographic craze for carte de visite portraits in 1860s, and the birth of the social media in the 19th century around the exchange of photographic portraits in a way collected into albums. So in that way we find that these kinds of changes, they were there from the initial times, and how people they were fascinated with their own self-portraits as well. And this kind of a selfie culture which has come over a period of time, it was also as a result of the developments which were happening in the art of photography, or in the kind of changes which were coming, or which was related to the technological changes which was concerned with the art of photography. So we find that how when you talk about cameras, how these cameras they were in a way allowing everyone to take the snapshots of oneself, family and the friends, and how the role of the photograph, it became comparatively more important in the context of perpetuating the impossible role models and pernicious stereotypes as well, and how to use the self-portraiture to neutralize and reverse the effects on self. And so when we try to relate these kinds of things from the earlier times, then we are able to see that the contemporary selfie culture is not very much different from the earlier times. But one of the new things which is more there in the context of the selfie culture is the digital technology. As soon as you click a photograph, you are able to see it in your mobile or the digital camera, and then you decide whether to keep it or to delete it. So these kinds of changes which have come with technology are comparatively new, and they have in a way defined, or rather redefined, the art of photography. Then we also see the question of photography's relationship to art has been a staple of discussion since the new technology was made known to public in 1839. So this kind of a discussion with regard to whether the photography is an art or whether photography is completely mechanical was there. But over a period of time we have also realized that photography involves a lot of creative input, and it is also some kind of an art which has to be cherished, as we find that cinema, for example, is films they are being made with cinematograph in earlier times, and later now the digital cameras, but they also involve, and many a times we have seen that the developments in technology, the way films they have been also shot in a different manner. But how the art form with regard to the film is there, though the camera belongs to the realm of technology. And it has also been suggested that the photography could be artistic, also had political ramifications in that sense. Some commentators, they saw it as a threat to natural order. Lady Eastlake in a way communicated this, and to the primacy of imaginative labor, as Charles Baudelaire talked about. And we have also seen that how many a times since the inception of the photography, how it has been used to explore geographic and botanical, as in the case of Britain we can see it. And we find that the photographs, they were generally accepted as straight empirical evidence as well, and how it was associated with interrogative questioning of the ecosystems and environmental change as well. And we shall also note the historical developments, including the changing notions of beauty in the landscape as well. So these kinds of things which were initially associated with the British photography, and the people, those who were associated with it, they were talking or they were discussing all these kinds of ideas in that particular framework. And in the Indian context, when we try to see it, that over a period of time, the kind of changes which have come because of the availability of camera with everyone, and how so many photos every day, millions of them, they are being posted on Instagram and Facebook every day, and how people, they take snapshots of their meals, how some of them, they document their travels with the selfie, and these kinds of selfie photos could be seen, and many of them, some of the serious photographers, they do not find any kind of importance, or they are not able to understand the importance of them because they don't see any kind of value in this kind of an activity where selfies, they are being posted. But as I told you that it was very old in that sense, in the framework of photography, and how many times we have seen that the tourist selfies which are there, they have a lot of value because the portrait or the travel documentary photos, it becomes some kind of a photographic record as well. It is some sort of a communication which is happening with the society, and it is also trying to communicate the people when they see them back home, that one of the persons who is clicking the photographs is safe in the travel. And it is also reminding your older self how young and free you once were. So all these kinds of things, they are there, and how the camera, it also enhances our memory of our travels as well. And as I told you that in the case of the food photos, people, they will click the photograph of the plate before they will eat it, because it is aspect of their travel photography. And it also communicates the flavor of the folk, and the photo of the plate will help the people to remind the taste of the travel that way. And it is also, in a way, travel is also concerned with the nature, and the landscape is also very important, and how landscape has been shot by or clicked by the various photographers, and how it inspires the others to travel by seeing that landscape. And a well taken landscape will put viewer in the scene as well, and it will have some kind of healing quality as well. And how the people, those who are suffering from some kind of a mental health or depression, they are being asked to go to hill stations and a good landscape so that they can be healed there. So in this way, we find that it gives the troubled vocal areas some kind of a rest as well. And much like meditation, photography puts oneself, someone in the present moment, where he is away from the depression of the past and the anxiety of the future. And it has also been seen that how marketing campaigns, they have been also driven by photography, and social media has also created a short attention span culture. So a photograph can be a very useful advertising tool as well. In the context of the wars also, we have seen that the war photographers, they show the horrors of the war in their photograph, and how a single photograph will communicate the horror of the war. So all these kinds of things, they have happened in the art of photography, and how the various kinds of visual expressions, whether it is in the framework of the folk art, in the framework of the calendar art, photography, and films as well. So all these, they have definitely played an important role in the framework of the various kinds of cultural practices, and in terms of also enriching our not only our cultural experience, but at the same time in communicating that cultural experiences to others as well. So with this, I'd like to end the discussion. Thank you very much.